Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and tonight I'm going to be bringing you the very latest on Tropical Storm Idalia. A very dangerous, potentially, situation setting up for the Florida Gulf Coast going forward Tuesday and Wednesday. I will be digging into the details of the track forecast, the intensity forecast, and a little bit on some of the major impacts that Florida can be expecting as we go forward here over the next couple days. For right now, I'm going to wait for just a couple minutes for the audience to come in, and then I will get right into the forecast. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Lots to talk about today, so I'm going to dig right into it. And first, we're going to get started by just looking at this is infra-satellite imagery tonight, looking down at Tropical Storm Idalia in the northwestern Caribbean. It looks like it's developing a central dense overcast or a deep area of thunderstorm activity right near its circulation center tonight. That's a bad sign. I think it sets us up for intensification into the day tomorrow. So let's start with the National Hurricane Center forecast key messages for the storm. First key message that the NHC wants to communicate is that the storm is likely to become a hurricane over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. It's going to bring life-threatening storm surge and hurricane-force winds to portions of the west coast of Florida. It's too soon to know exactly where those impacts are going to happen, but it's going to happen somewhere in the range of the Eastern Panhandle, the Big Bend, into the northern Nature Coast. And significant impacts will extend much further south along the Gulf Coast as well. We already have hurricane watches in effect, basically from Apalachicola all the way south to Charlotte Harbor region, and some tropical storm watches south of there. So storm surge watches are also in effect for the west coast of Florida. That's the NHC's first key message. NHC is also talking about some flash and urban flooding possible as Idalia moves through on Tuesday and Wednesday. And these are impacts over the Caribbean, so we're less concerned with those. This is the NHC forecast track as of the 5 p.m. Eastern Time advisory. There's been an 8 p.m. intermediate advisory since then that increased maximum sustained winds up from 40 to 45 miles per hour. Idalia right now is just drifting at 3 miles per hour, kind of making a little loop here in the Caribbean, and maybe just drifting a little bit further east as we've gone through the day today. So that's something to keep an eye on. These are the last 5 National Hurricane Center forecast tracks for the system. And as you can see, there have not been big changes, but we have seen these earlier forecasts in light blue, later ones in darker blue. We've come just a little bit east with this storm. Not moving dramatically, not going out of, not switching from one forecast track scenario to another one, but a general, just a little bit of a drift east as this initial position has kind of shifted a little bit east as the storm gets better organized. This is the National Hurricane Center last 5 intensity forecasts, and what you can see here is this peak of intensity. The first few advisories were Cat 1 intensity. NHC advisory as of 5 o'clock is now up to peaking the storm out as a Category 2. NHC forecast is probably still a little bit on the conservative side here, so I would not be surprised to see that continue to be revised higher as we go into the day tomorrow. It seems probable that the NHC forecast tomorrow is going to be for a major hurricane at some point on approach to the Florida coastline. So we're going to talk about right now, I want to break down, first I want to talk a little bit about the track forecast, and then I want to talk separately about the intensity forecast, because this is kind of a different type of scenario for track and intensity forecasting than what Florida's dealt with recently. So this is, again, this is an infrared satellite imagery. These whites and purples that we're looking at here with Idalia, they're very tall convective clouds bubbling up through the atmosphere to a very high height, so the tops of them are very cold, and that's what the satellite is seeing. So this is where the circulation center is roughly, and what we've seen here in the last 3 to 6 hours are these very deep, very strong convective cells kind of wrapping around and surrounding the center. For most of the day today, those convective cells have kind of been on the south and the eastern side of the storm, but now they're starting to kind of wrap around here, and that's something that typically you start to see when a tropical system is getting better organized, and that's what's happening right now. Unfortunately, we don't currently have reconnaissance aircraft in the system to confirm what's going on with the intensity. But we do have radar out of Cancun, and it's showing that this the center of circulation with these bands kind of wrapping around. You've got these deep convective cells popping up right near the center of circulation. So we do have an intensification trend currently ongoing, and I think that's going to continue over the next 12 to 24 hours as Idalia, over the course of the day, on Monday, slowly starts to move north in a little bit more organized fashion. So to discuss the longer-term track scenario, this actually isn't all that complicated or uncertain of a track forecast. There's always going to be some shifts back and forth in the modeling, in the guidance. That's something that we can always expect and anticipate. But in this case, there's a reason why I don't think we're going to see huge forecast changes in where this thing is heading. The features that are going to be moving this around as we get forward here until later in the day tomorrow. So these are winds about 4 miles up in the atmosphere, 3-4 miles up in the atmosphere tomorrow, midday, afternoon. And these are the steering currents that the storm is going to be feeling. So the players on the map here are this big subtropical ridge of high pressure out here in the southwest Atlantic. This is Hurricane Franklin out here. So that's another hurricane, but it's not one that we're too concerned about. It's going to be moving north and east and away from the continental United States. We have an upper level low here in the Gulf of Mexico, and we've got some winds coming around there. And we've also got this deep trough of a jet stream dip coming into the Great Lakes, dropping into the Tennessee River Valley. And you can see those strong steering winds from west to east, kind of pointing to the northeast associated with that. So when you add it up, what Idalia is going to be feeling here is kind of this squeeze play between this trough, this upper low, and this ridge of high pressure, and it sets up this kind of channel for the storm to move through. You can kind of do that trace in the winds, in those upper level steering winds, and they kind of go like this. There's this lane where, I'd probably do that one a little too far to the west, this lane where the storm is probably going to follow. So, the reformations of the center moving a little bit left or right, it's probably still going to be following within this lane, and that sets up the area that we're concerned for landfall as basically being here from Apalachicola into the northern edge of the Tampa Bay region. So that's basically what we can expect in terms of steering and landfall. This is model guidance for this storm. So these are the 12Z or kind of midday model runs from the European, the American, the British, and the Canadian models. So this is going back to, here's tomorrow morning, and rolling forward with time. And what you can note here is that while there is some spread in the model guidance, with the GFS a bit further west, the European model a little further to the east, there's not dramatic differences here. All four, it's not that huge. So some expectation of changes within kind of that range of the west central Florida, Big Bend, Eastern Panhandle coast. They're still possible. We can't narrow it down too much more than that at this time, but I don't think there's going to be dramatic changes, in the track scenario overall, like we saw with Ian. So those are the basics of the track forecast. I want to talk more about intensity because that's really the uncertainty here. So this is water vapor imagery. And what that allows us to do is to look down from a satellite and kind of see how much moisture is in the atmosphere between 2 and 4 miles up. And that's a key level for sustaining the kind of deep convection, those deep storms that make hurricanes intensify. What you can see here is right now there's plenty of low-level moisture, these kind of grays and blues. There's lots of moisture right now around Idalia, so it's not having a problem developing that deep convection right now. But if you do look a little bit further north, these oranges and yellows that are out over the Gulf of Mexico here, that's a pretty dry air mass at the mid-levels. And some of that, as Idalia starts to move north here over the next day, it's probably going to get pulled into the western half of the storm. Now, to what extent does that dry air overspread the circulation center? If it just stays out kind of in these outer bands as the storm moves north, that's not going to do a whole lot to cause the storm to not be able to intensify. If some of that drier air gets a little bit closer into the core, or kind of the left side of the core, that might slow down the rate of intensification on Monday. And that's something that I hope to see, something I'll be watching very closely tomorrow, the extent to which that drier air over the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the reason it hasn't rained a whole lot in parts of Florida over the last 2 or 3 days, if some of that gets kind of caught up here in the storm and maybe taps the brakes a bit on intensification. And I really hope it does, because by the time Tuesday rolls around, things are going to be very favorable otherwise for potentially rapid intensification. Now, rapid intensification means wind speeds increasing by 35 miles per hour within a 24-hour period. So these are the upper level winds, about 6 or 7 miles up in the atmosphere as we go into Tuesday morning. So here's the hurricane right here. Here's our storm. And terrific art from me here. The problem that I'm seeing, the thing that worries me, is what's going to set up is something called dual channel outflow. So you can see this is the jet stream up here in the northern U.S. and these purples, that's places where the upper level jet is moving very quickly. As air is coming into what's potentially going to be a hurricane, coming into the storm at low levels, rising up through the clouds, that air needs somewhere to go. It needs to be evacuated or ventilated. And what you see here is that the hurricane starts to connect with that fast upper level wind flow into that jet. So that air can rise quickly through the storm. It can be taken away and more air can come up through the lower levels of the atmosphere and replace it, causing deep convection, causing intensification. So we've got this favorable interaction with this jet streak to the north. What you also have setting up is what we have right now is we have outflow to the south, and you're going to continue to have that outflow to the south. So the air that's coming out of the storm on the south side is going to be also ventilated and evacuated. So on the south side of the storm, air moves south, upper levels, and on the north side it moves north, and that is a recipe for a quickly intensifying storm system. That dual channel outflow, it's not something you want to see. And at the same time as the storm is going to be moving over, experiencing that dual channel outflow on Tuesday, it's going to be moving over the northeastern Gulf of Mexico in a region where there's just in absurd amounts of potential energy for a tropical cyclone to tap into. We're showing on the left here, this is what we call tropical cyclone heat potential, or how much warmth there is with depth in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's not just how hot the surface of the water is, but 50 meters down, are you still talking about very warm water? And the answer in the Gulf of Mexico is yes. The water temperatures are still 87, 88, 50 meters down in the Gulf of Mexico. That's really unprecedented, and it's a very dangerous thing to be setting up. In comparison, at the right here, this is the heat potential in the Gulf of Mexico ahead of Michael. So you had these values of between 30 and 40 across the northeastern Gulf. That was perfectly sufficient to touch off a furious rapid intensification cycle. The values right now in the kind of the northeastern Gulf are between 60 and 80, so about double the potential energy being available to Idalia versus Michael. Now, sea surface temperatures, they don't cause a storm to intensify by themselves. when the other ingredients are there, they can lead to explosive growth. So that's something that I'm very concerned about, looking at that energy that's going to be available to the storm. So putting it together, this is some of the intensity guidance, and up here there's a cluster of models that are basically the hurricane-specific models. So they try to make a good guess about the physics of what's going on in the hurricane core to have a more realistic forecast for maximum intensity. And all these, the U.S. intensity models, hurricane models, are all kind of cracking this Category 3 threshold here at 100 knots, kind of in this Category 3 range right now. And some of the models that are more like the global models that aren't, that aren't as skillful with intensity, they're not modeling the inner core as well. They're weaker. But we're seeing this good agreement, unfortunately, of this rapid intensification event starting in about 36 hours and maybe proceeding into towards landfall early on Wednesday. Again, that's something that it scares the heck out of me to see, but there's good reason why these models are behaving this way, and it's because the ingredients are there. Hopefully that dry air can nip into the western semicircle of the storm and tap the brakes on this a little bit. But if it doesn't, it's going to be off to the races, unfortunately. Looking basically at what the models are showing for shear, shear is right in the range where it's actually favorable for ventilating. Sea surface temperatures only go up through landfall, and that mid-level humidity that we're looking at, it's in a decent range through kind of across the storm as a whole. Maybe there's a little bit of pockets of drier air that work in here that this model isn't showing, but overall, looking at this as a hurricane scientist, there's just I'm trying to rack my brain to think what's going to stop this from becoming a major hurricane and coming up short, other than the dry air. So we'll be watching the dry air evolution very closely tomorrow, because come Tuesday, I think the other ingredients are really going to be in place to set this thing off and push it up to a major hurricane. So I'm going to focus more tomorrow on the impacts of the storm once we can start to narrow down the track even further. But I do want to talk a little bit tonight about surge, because surge is much less sensitive to the exact track of the storm. We don't need to know if it's going to make landfall here or down here to know that it's going to be some significant storm surge along the Nature Coast and the west central Florida coast. Right now, along the current Hurricane Center forecast track, potential for 7 to 11 feet of storm surge here in the Big Bend and northern Nature Coast, and somewhere between 3 and 8 feet from Tampa Bay and north into the kind of the southern Nature Coast. 2 to 4 feet of surge here in southwest Florida too. That's something that's, again, you're not going to see landfall in southwest Florida, but you don't need to see landfall in southwest Florida to get surge coming into especially some of the areas where they're more funnel shaped, or the bathymetry of the coast is just more favorable to causing flooding. So Tampa Bay is something that I want to draw some specific focus to right now. So this is basically the GFS model of winds at the surface coming into late Tuesday. And the modeling is all that this is going to pass 50 or 100 miles west of Tampa Bay. Sure, maybe that starts to nudge a little bit closer. That's something we'll need to watch with time. However, a path offshore the Tampa Bay region is still one that can drive significant storm surge even without a landfall. There's going to be a broad area of tropical storm force winds coming into the west central Florida coast. It's going to be pushing water up the mouth of Tampa Bay and then to these kind of south-facing bay coasts of Pinellas and Hillsborough County. So obviously monitor your local emergency management information very closely, but you need to know you're not out of the woods in Tampa Bay just because this is going to probably pass to your west. A track to the west of Tampa Bay is something that really worries meteorologists just for this region, because you're going to be pushing this wall of Gulf water kind of up into the eastern Gulf. So that's something that I'm very worried about and isn't very, particularly sensitive to exactly where this hurricane goes. Of course, we're also looking at some potential for extreme surge here up in Apalachicola, from Apalachicola through Apalachee Bay, Cedar Key, all along the Nature Coast. and of course watching for some surge as well. Some impacts are almost certain, are very, very likely here, even in southwest Florida as well. Winds, I'll discuss this more later. This is more sensitive to changes, potential changes in the forecast track. These areas that are outlined in red here, those are the areas that are most likely to see hurricane force winds along the current track. So we're talking about the coastline from Appalachia Bay into the northern part of the Tampa Bay region. We'll come back to this tomorrow. We have a little more certainty on what the track is going to is going to shake out. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now with that overview of the track and the intensity forecast and why this is a very potentially dangerous situation for West Central Florida, for North Central Florida, for the Eastern Panhandle. Something we'll have to watch very, very closely going forward here. My number one rule at WeatherTiger is I don't pull the fire alarm unless there's a fire. But as I said in my column today, Idalia is a fire, and we need to pull the fire alarm and start getting ready for this thing right now. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up for tonight. This has been Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger. Keep monitoring our forecasts, available round the clock at weathertiger.com, and we've also got our forecasts going up across the USA Today network, so monitor there as well. All right, Florida, stay safe. The time to prepare is now, because weather is going to start to go downhill on Tuesday, so you really just have tomorrow to do what you need to do, to count on it. Maybe the first half of the day Tuesday, but get the work done tomorrow. The things that you need to do to identify the gaps in your hurricane plan and your hurricane kit. All right, Florida, this is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger. Stay safe. Keep watching the skies.